Okay, so in this second part, I'd like to talk about just some of the strategies and techniques I have used to socialize, as I said before, socialize students into the social practices of authorship and avoiding plagiarism. And again, by socialize, I mean not just developing the skills, the language, and understanding the culture, but how all of those are embedded in how we as academics or authors in a given discipline understand texts and genre by weaving our own voices appropriately and effectively with respect to the voices of others. This socialization process in the classroom involves different tasks and activities that I engage students in that take different dimensions or pieces of this quote unquote problem for multilingual students of English. So the first thing I usually do is certainly something that everybody does in the classroom, and that is, or most people do in the classroom, and that is on the first day, I go over the syllabus, I talk about the issue of plagiarism, but I again embed or contextualize plagiarism with respect to authorship and some of the cultural values that underlie it. So, for example, in the syllabus, I have a very explicit statement about, what plagiarism is, a definition. I talk about why it's important. I talk about what are the consequences of it, but also what students can do if they suspect that they are committing an apparent act of plagiarism. And then after or before each assignment, I talk about how they can avoid plagiarism. I remind them with respect to that given assignment. More importantly, and I have a packet of, on the course site, a packet of activities that I'm going to talk about. I won't talk about all of them. I'll just talk about some of them for the sake of time. But one of the first things I do is I talk about authorship, and students don't even really realize that I'm talking about plagiarism as well. I take the course textbook or some other book, I copy the acknowledgments page, and I have a set of discussion questions, as you see in that packet of authorship activities, that we discuss as a class, we discuss in pairs and groups about why the author is giving credit to these other individuals. What did these individuals do, and why is there this need to talk about other people's contributions? I also talk about, when in their lives, the students' lives, do they do this? Would they do this in their own writing or in other ways in everyday life? There's another task or activity in that packet that asks students to clarify and discuss their values about what constitutes plagiarism, what doesn't, and why. And I use this as a material for whole class discussion. Really just recognizing that sometimes plagiarism can mean different things in different contexts, different disciplines certainly, but also that it can just be a very problematic issue. And here's where I begin to field students' questions and concerns about their own writing for the class I'm teaching, but also other classes. We On a skills-based and language-based level, I have them identify individual cases of plagiarism, and they discuss why or why not. As you see in that handout, I give a original paragraph and then different paraphrases and quotes, and I have students discuss which ones constitute plagiarism and why, but also we correct it as a whole group. What strategies individuals can use to create authorship more appropriately and effectively. So identifying individual cases, I think, helps the students identify their own. We also practice with the language skills of paraphrasing step by step through synonym usage, through altering the syntactic structure of a sentence but keeping the same meaning, changing word forms to create a paraphrase, using a combination of strategies, and then using very complex linguistic skills I help them practice in order to introduce other people's ideas in both quotes and paraphrase, what we call reporting phrases of different types, using reporting verbs like said or says or states. Bill Smith states in his article entitled blah, 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 or according to Mary Jones, 1992, or whatever. The citation skills, certainly, but also the very complex and sophisticated language skills involving complex vocabulary with the author's opinions encoded within reporting verbs, he alleges, for example, as well as complex syntactic structures. John Smith says versus according to John Smith in his art. These are very complex syntactic structures that students need to practice. And we also talk about how to follow up. That it's not just about quote, 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 paraphrase, 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 but also how do we state our own point first as an author. How and why and when do we use quotes and paraphrases to support that point that we're making? And then how do we follow up by commenting on quotes and paraphrases and then leading to the next quote and paraphrase or the next main point? This is what I mean, as I said in the first segment, about weaving together voices. So we do some practice with that. I also do, and I think this is probably one of the most important to get at social practices, is that I engage students in textual analysis or genre analysis. I have an example in the packet there where I give a text where the author is stating his or her own points, citing many other people's scholarly works, and I talk about, or we analyze together and work in groups about identifying whose voice is whose, where is the author's opinion, what is the author's opinion, how does the author feel about these different citations, these different quotes and paraphrases and summaries in the text, and how does the author follow up, as I mentioned before. In this way, we're not just dealing with plagiarism and authorship on a sentence-by-sentence level, but we're looking at how and why the author integrates or synthesizes voices in order to construct an effective and appropriate academic text. Then we talk about also why the author does this, why the author makes certain choices, how this would be constructed differently for different audiences in different disciplines. And then I also try to relate these types of texts to the students' own lives. That is, I might talk about, an example like you're writing a letter to a friend about your recommendations for going to Lehigh University and enrolling in the engineering program, why that would be a good recommendation for your friend. And you want to maybe cite, your guidance counselor and what his or her recommendations were, or the website or some combination, the Lehigh website or some combination of those sources. How and why would you do that in a more informal letter? In this way, I'm trying to engage them in a discussion of values and beliefs when it comes to authorship, authoring some text or genre for a particular community, but also how and why you would do that for yourself in terms of expressing your own voice. Finally, as you'll see in the text, I just give a brief example, that packet of activities, an example of a report from Turnitin.com. I really like Turnitin.com, although I have some issues with it. But the way I use it is for helping students internalize that self-regulatory social practice that we engage in, that thinking that we engage in as authors. The questions that we ask are, am I plagiarizing here? Am I accurately categorizing or adequately quoting and paraphrasing accurately? Am I expressing my own voice clearly and directly with respect to these other sources. These are the types of questions that we all engage in as effective authors, I would argue, because we've internalized what others have taught us or what we've come to learn from looking at the texts of other authors in the community. I don't suggest using the turnitin.com as a policing tool, at least not solely, but I think the key here is helping the individual students use it as a tool for themselves to regulate themselves. So I talk about this, and especially when students get a little panicky when they see, 12% of my text is plagiarized according to turnitin.com. And then or they get freaked out about, using the word "the" in their own text, and is this plagiarism? I help them to evaluate Turnitin.com and its results, and help them, internalize those questions that Turnitin.com seems to prompt. In this way, I'm hoping to have a broader perspective on issues of plagiarism, other than ethics or skills, but engage them in this level of social practice, beliefs, textual production, etc. And that's what I find as useful.